Good afternoon,
Good afternoon, Rodrigo. How are you?
and I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Wonderful.
Great. Well, it's good to be with you today, and I thank you for joining me today. For those who may be viewing this interview, my name is Rodrego Byerly. I am a member of the American Association of Public Opinion Research, and I serve as chief executive at Evitarus Public Opinion Research. This is an AAPOR Pioneer interview. It's one of a distinguished number of conversations held with selected pioneers in the opinion research and market research field. The purpose of the interview is to gain insight into how such pioneers utilize tools such as opinion and market research over the trajectory of their career, their longevity and luminance within the field, and any important learnings which might be helpful for other researchers, including those who may be just embarking upon their career. These interviews are voluntary. They're audio and video recorded for the benefit of burgeoning researchers. Interviewees do not receive a participation honorarium. Finally, this pioneer interview is part of the overall APOR Heritage interview series. I'm pleased today to be joined by Dr. Wayne R. McCullough. Dr. McCullough is a member of APOR and an honoree of APOR, having accepted the APOR Inclusive Voices Award on behalf of the University of Michigan's Program for Research on Black Americans. Dr. McCullough is also a longtime faculty member and leader in the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health, as well as the Department of Family Medicine at Michigan State University, who is now also retired. Importantly, Dr. McCullough is also former chairman of the board of directors for the American Marketing Association and a member of the American Psychological Association, among many other notable accomplishments in both opinion and market research. He's the former assistant study director for the national surveys of Black Americans housed in the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. Welcome, Dr. McCullough.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, to start things off, tell me a bit about your background and how you came to be introduced to research.
Well, it's a jagged path in that, you know, as a young lad, I really had thoughts of becoming a biochemist. And in fact, in high school, I was communicating with a professor at Ohio University about some chemical experiments that I was doing on the isolation of caffeine from tea and coffee. Um, and my intent going to college was that I was going to pursue a degree in biochemistry. So I'm originally from Youngstown, Ohio, and my education path took me to Princeton University as an undergrad. And then I really finished with a master's and PhD at the University of Michigan in social psychology. But again, my original intent was to be a biochemist. And you might ask the question of, well, how'd you go from that to becoming a survey researcher? And
That's a
frankly,
great question.
I'm glad you asked it. So, it really was a result of the social milieu of the early 1970s. You know, the social political environment. We were enmeshed in the Vietnam War, lots of social unrest, political unrest on college campuses. And as a uh, young freshman at a school who had just recently one started coeducation. That was my freshman year, and two had really admitted a large class of diverse students, truly diverse in lots of respects. So that chaos in the environment allowed me to see some things that ordinarily it was not a quiet, ivy-covered, cloistered environment, but rather I experienced in that freshman year a lot of chaos among my colleagues of color. And they were having not so much academic difficulties because everybody there was highly qualified to be there. Um, but the social upheaval and frankly, the university was not fully prepared for the combination of a very diverse student population as well as coeducation, which was a tremendous change for them in the environment. I saw some of my colleagues becoming a bit troubled. And in fact, a number of them did not return to school either at the end of the first semester and certainly not at the beginning of the second year. So that really intrigued me about, how do I better understand what's going on in this social environment? And I'm not sure exactly how I did it because we didn't have internet at that point, but I researched for a questionnaire and I found one by John Centra at ETS, and I adapted it to create my own survey. So here I was, 1970, creating my first survey research project. And I developed a questionnaire that attempted to identify what the experience was for students of color entering Princeton University. So in the old days, all of this was clearly paper and pencil. I duplicated the questionnaire, and in the first week or two of the new semester, there in 1970, I distributed this questionnaire to every freshman of color and asked them to complete it. And I actually administered that survey, the very same questionnaire to understand change over time. So I did it before the December break and then about a month before the end of the school year in order for me to get a handle on kind of what that experience was for students. So for me, I was trying to understand what are the elements in this social political environment that affected students of color. That was my first survey.
Fascinating, and congratulations.
Thanks.
Um, Thinking back to that time, was there any particular mentor who loomed large in your life, either that introduced you to survey research as a method or that helped you kind of think through the transition from what your prior interests were to what might be some useful tools for you to understand some of the social political dynamics that you were interested in.
So, unfortunately, the psychology program, which I was in at Princeton, was an experimental social psychology program. And I worked as a research assistant there for several years, doing research on bystander intervention, as well as some of my own original research. But there's no one that was really practiced in survey methods per se. Had some conversations with actually graduate students and some others in sociology, but they were not truly trained. And I helped a graduate student on a project he was doing for his dissertation at a prison in New Jersey. But I didn't receive good, strong guidance because had I received that, I would have been able to certainly develop analytic strategies for all the data that I collected. So I knew about the scientific method. I knew how to control for certain um, things, and I really did think through in the very early stages. What about the folks who don't respond? And I didn't know it as non-response error, but I really considered how might they be different than those who actually responded to my questionnaire in total over the course of that first year. So Um, Early stages about that. And in fact, it was that love of the survey research, even though I was being trained in experimental social psychology. Um, that love of the survey method is what ultimately led me to the program at Michigan, because I had been admitted to a number of graduate schools, clinical and experimental social, but it was the folks at the Institute for Social Research that really attracted my attention ultimately.
Yeah. Thank you for that last part. That was actually the question that I was going to ask. What dynamics or dynamic really helped to focus your interest and help you decide that this is an area, this is a tool in which I'd like to focus my career, and then to go along with that, can you talk a bit about your career path,
Mhm.
starting with that transition to ISR and University of Michigan?
Okay. Well, I will admit to you that it was still too early to think about the career path. And in fact, I hope folks will understand, and certainly the older ones who might view this would understand that raised by parents who came out of the Depression era and the Second World War, and the orientation then, and certainly for any students of color, is you got to make sure you can get a job. So as an undergrad, I did a teaching certificate, so I always had something to fall back on, and I could always teach school. But the pursuit of graduate education is something, and I was clearly a first generation in my nuclear family of both going to college and as well as graduate school. Um, and so I didn't have a lot of role models around about the career that I might pursue. And a career in survey research was not something that was front and center. I did, however, when I first landed in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the Institute for Social Research, I kind of signed up for a project and I got trained as an interviewer for a validation study by Martin Gold on the use of drugs in adolescence. And so in the fall of, 1969, I was being trained as an interviewer. And it's that Survey Research Center training that then opened my eyes to a lot more possibilities. Now, you asked about the career and what those aspirations might have been. I was very much interested in organizational behavior. And, one of my mentors in graduate school was Dorwin. You knew him as Doc Cartwright, who was one of the co-authors of Group Dynamics, and a fantastic guy. But he was an organizational psych guy, if you will. We had an organizational psych program, and so I got to know a number of those folks. And so the career piece actually evolved a little bit more over time, as well as being trained in some survey methods and taking some of the summer coursework in survey methodology. But I spent a summer in the mid 70s at the Center for Creative Leadership. And it was that leadership training. And I kind of got there through Stan Seashore, who was head of the organizational behavior program at Michigan, and really learned so much more about both leadership and my second major survey research project was done that summer when we had a group of almost 14 graduate students living together in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who were working at different companies. And so I employed a survey at the company I was working with to understand the elements that would either impede or I helped to implement a performance appraisal system in the company. So I utilized those data to help inform approaches to how to get that done. So it's that combination of Center for Creative Leadership that then fed into the organizational behavior piece that terribly excited me about the possibilities. So that, again, I hadn't decided on a career per se, but further use of survey research. And returning to Michigan, after that summer, I did other projects for the Office of the President on counseling services using survey research, both among students and the counseling agencies on campus, working with Pat Gurin. And so I was chugging along, really enjoying and exploring research methodology, courses, etc. I don't know if that answered your question.
Absolutely. One strain that comes through in everything that you've talked about so far, starting from your undergraduate days even to uh, grad school activities, is that you were very much a self-starter when it comes to generating your own data sets. Now, most of us, when we're interested in utilizing survey research as a method, we'll go look for a survey that's already uh, been designed and fielded. Here you are creating your own survey and collecting data among your fellow students as an undergrad, and you continued that as you just described as a graduate student. Share with us, what was that spark? What was it within you that caused you to think, I want to collect my own data as opposed to utilizing some other data set that already existed?
Well, it's a great question about that spark, and I'm not sure I um, fully understand the spark, but I know it was there. And I always had a strong sense for the questions I wanted to ask and have answered. And, a lot of existing data sets, and, many people understand, are not necessarily created around the, if you will, the primary research question. And I have evolved over time to become what I will, well, what's known as kind of a total survey error person. So I need to be able to fully appreciate the questions being asked, why they're being asked, and making sure they're asked of the right people at the right time. And so, because of those internal standards, a lot of secondary data would not fit the bill. And so my design point was always, who do I need to get, answers from in order to answer these questions? And that really persisted in so much of the primary data collection that I did. And I was fortunate enough to not be constrained, because usually it's about cost and access to the right people in order to do primary data collection. But I always was very clear, and this is true up through the work I did for the National Survey of Black Americans, of having question by question objectives about, the research that I was going to conduct.
Yeah, thank you. Um, can you talk a bit about um, a few of the studies that you either directed or in which you were involved that you would consider to be pivotal, groundbreaking, landmark studies that have far-reaching implications, either as relates to sampling, who was involved in the study, or how you went about to analyze and publicize the
Well,
results.
I should just step back just for a second, because I think what's important to the conversation is understanding. Most people would say, well, you kind of came from University of Michigan, you came from ISR, so therefore you are a social researcher. And so the studies you would put together and the places in which you would work would be of that ilk. However, going back to the organizational psych orientation, think that I just really wanted to do a lot in the realm of survey research. Loved it. And when I finished my work at Michigan, as I was finishing up, I went to work for IBM. And IBM was a place that um, really took survey research very seriously. They had 408,000 employees, and they surveyed them on average every 18 months. Now, anybody who loves data, that's a whole lot of data in the making from around the world. So we had a conversation, and I got invited to join IBM. Um, this all happened within a 5-day period. So it happened, came together very quickly. I was excited, they were excited, and I started work there. Now, wasn't the first project, but the second project I had at IBM was an executive survey. And it was a survey of the top 2,000 executives of the company around the world. Had never been done before. And so, again, marrying the organizational behavior piece with my love of surveys, and very importantly, doing surveys around business questions was extremely important. So, this is a study that was mounted, and they were three independent but highly interrelated studies from regions around the world. The data were collected almost simultaneously, again, kind of still in that era, paper and pencil. But we brought these data back and reported them to the top management of the company. And again, only the folks who are very old will think about days in which there was no PowerPoint. And so the creation of data summary slides was only possible through things that we were able to generate. And so each of the organizational units, I would display on charts, what I call dot charts. So for each of the measures, I would, point each of the organizational units, how far apart they were, how close they were, and which ones were outliers. So we're able to report to senior management what's happening in the company and the views of these senior executives. And I will tell you that change did happen. Very important organizational and personnel change as a result of that survey. And that furthered me into really understanding the impact that survey research can have, and when it's reported out correctly, that action can be taken. That was one. You asked about others. There are a range of others, but I'll just report on one other, and that is throughout my career, 26 years in industry, I joined the automotive space. And one of the most important, and I will say game-changing studies, was a segmentation study done for an automotive manufacturer. And this was a worldwide segmentation study, not just, about the customers, but it was attitudes, values, and usage. So it allowed us to understand not only our own brands, but also those of competitors. So where they all fit in space. And so if you wanted to understand, if you will, market share, where it might come from, who are the customers and prospects, where they might be drawn from, also allowed for you to do product development and forecasting. Because what's extremely important in the automotive space is understanding what your sales volume might be. This was an extremely important study on a worldwide basis. Now, I will note that this second study, there's another one in my history where I also kind of did this, but For this study to be effective, it had to be truly sold into the organization. So we spent as almost as much time as we did in data collection talking about the methods and techniques and what the data meant. And so spent a lot of time in that, even to the point where created some deliverables. So for those of you who know and understand segmentation, and I know you do, it's about um, each of the segments, a good description of them, their their adjacencies in terms of attitudes, values, and vehicle usage in this case. And very importantly, um, we spent time creating these deliverables, and there was this puzzle put together in each of the each of the segments and where they fit. So the distance between the segments suggested there's not going to be a lot of overlap in attitudes, values, and product, but those closest are where you may be able to draw from. Not only did we have the placement of our brands in these segments, but also competitive brands. So it was a huge opportunity for people across the company to fully understand segmentation. Again, that's just a little bit on the top.
Thank you. Um, Shifting gears a little bit, um, one of the things that's caught my attention during this conversation is that you've mentioned several times the time and place of conducting the studies. And in particular, several of these studies were fielded using paper and pen. The survey research industry has changed so much since then. And I think your reflection on how you fielded then really brings into focus where we are today. Can you talk a bit about some of the changes that you've seen, which you feel are most impactful in the survey research space, whether it be the mode through which we field, pen and paper, in person versus via telephone, online, or other changes that you've seen come to pass?
Well, again, I started in the era of where it was all virtually paper and pencil, a lot of self-administered, if you will, but also a lot of in-person interviews. And so, as we all understand, very kind of time intensive, and the quality of the data you collect can be affected by interviewer effects and lots of other things. But we then migrated to much greater use of telephone interviewing. And the telephone interviewing was a lot more time and cost efficient. But over time, people start answering their telephones, and we migrated to cell phones. And in fact, we also migrated to online. And so it's that confluence of being able to identify the people where they are and get to them when they are willing to have the conversation with you is all important. The other really important thing about this is, and I always come back to who are we really representing? When we did, household selections, we kind of knew where people were from census data, et cetera. We knew pretty much how good our sample was and whether we suffered from non-response bias, et cetera. We have migrated now to an era, certainly over the last 10, 12 years, where online research is virtually the only way in which you can get this stuff done. Not the only way. Other ways are, more costly. But the question I have huge, and that is, what is the quality of your sample? And this is a clear case of garbage in, garbage out. Because if you haven't sampled the right people to ask the right questions of them at the right time in the right way, you're likely to get some responses that are not going to take you where you need to be. And so the quality of online research, um, especially when there are so many paid respondents who sign up for panels. I could, be in 8, 9, 10 different panels, but is that who, the researcher really needs to be talking to? And that, I think, is the fundamental question that we have to continue to address today.
Mm. Thank you for highlighting that issue. I'd like to just maybe spend just a few moments talking about it a little further. Um, Today we have large national probability panels
Mhm.
that are of well repute and spend a lot of time thinking about who we are reaching and representation. You mentioned very early on that even back in college, you were thinking about who didn't respond and whether they are truly like the folks who do respond. So within the context of some of the tried and true panels that we have available to pull from today, versus those folks who may not be captured within them and what that says about representation. Can you just opine a bit about maybe what might be some recommendations you may have, or some questions that you may have for us as survey researchers to consider?
Well, this is where, I have to, pull out my very high regard and respect for AAPOR, because these are, many of the questions that AAPOR has been dealing with, and certainly through the transparency initiative, trying to understand what so many different polls and panels are actually doing, where they're drawing information from, who are the people. And I think back to a very early learning experience, and that is everything I know about sampling was predicated upon the two paper routes I had as a 11, 12-year-old. And that is, I was delivering papers to to the neighborhoods, and I experienced every day the people who lived there, they worked there, they played there. Not all of them took a newspaper. So that was extremely important because I didn't recognize it at the time as a very young chap, but there may have been economic issues, there may have been literacy issues. Um, and, when I think back upon that, my way of segmenting, that paper route, because they also require different levels of service. Some wanted it in the screen door. I could throw it up on the porch for others, etc. So all of this helped me to understand populations in very different ways. And I come to populations today in the same way. So what are the things that I may not be aware of that actually separate some of the people that both we're speaking with and those we are not? So we oftentimes define them uh, in ways that are captured by demographics. That's not all. There are very important and very significant attitude and values that we need to take into consideration. And so that's why I like the folk of APOR. We're always trying to disentangle those effects to get to the ultimate rendering of total survey error.
Yeah, thank you. Can you share a bit about your involvement in research associations or organizations other than APOR,
Ah,
uh, such as Advertising Research Foundation and others?
well, that actually harkens back to my earlier days in industry. Originally, when I went to IBM, I was doing employee research and some personnel kinds of things. But what really intrigued me were the larger branding and external facing issues. And so back in the mid 80s, I actually became involved, had the opportunity to, really manage the personal computer division market research. And it was that market research that then opened my eyes to the external facing of customers and what they thought of the brand and our offerings. Now, one of the things I recognized within the company there is that we didn't have all the skills necessary in order to do this work. Folks were redeployed into the function that didn't necessarily, I'm not going to say didn't belong, but they weren't trained to do the work. I, as a professional researcher, recognized this, and then I sought out what were others doing in the industry. So that's where started to look at something that had been convened by Mike Naples at the ARF called the Research Industry Leaders Forum, or RILF. And it was a combination of researchers from on the client side, researchers certainly doing advertising research, audience measurement, even some from advertising agencies where there was a good body of researchers at that point, as well as research firms. And so we would meet periodically and talk about what are the requisite skills that researchers need to have. Out of those conversations over several years emerged the core body of knowledge that was agreed upon by folks across these different groupings. And a curriculum was developed on that core body of knowledge. And so the Market Research Institute International was the overseer of that, making sure it was updated periodically, et cetera. But it also resulted in a curriculum, an online curriculum that was administered by the University of Georgia in an online space. So these were, paid education. Lots of firms, Burke and, range of others were providing market research education and training, but this was agreed upon by the industry. Now, caveat here, and that is the core body of knowledge was not certification. Many folks walked away from being the certifier because, we weren't, an accounting, uh, overseer or anything of that sort. So we were not providing a credential of that sort, even though there are agencies, certainly outside the US, who utilize that core body of knowledge and the training for credentialing and certification purposes. But that's how the core body of knowledge and that training came about. So that's through ARF. And I served on the board of ARF for a number of years. And a number of other organizations. But my search for researchers and how they were trained also took me to the conference board, both the Conference Board Council on Market Research and their Western Council. And so companies, I'm talking on the client side, had research heads as members of that. And we talked about research standards, how the skills were developed, et cetera, as well as, what were the best research firms. So the agency side, if you will, about who was doing good work. So it was extremely important that, we had those conversations in order to upskill the overall set of professionals in the field. I don't know if that answered, some of your questions there.
But it does. Thank you. Thinking back over the course of engaging with different industry associations, um, what have been some of the most notable challenges that you've had to work through?
Well, again, the research industry, certainly on the public opinion and market research has changed quite dramatically over time. As I noted, there used to be clusters of skills and expertise that at one point resided actually in the advertising agencies. That kind of flowed out. The client side had them, and many clients still have those research functions, but not like they used to. Um, the challenge is identifying where the research talents are. And, there are lots of research firms out there. And excuse me, and this is not meant to say that um, the research firms aren't doing good, valuable work, but they are all trying to market the same stuff. And that is from the perspective of research, and that is they slice the bread better in these ways. And so the the clients are trying to better understand, certainly if they're trained, about which firms they should be working with in that regard. And therein lies a significant challenge for the research firms to break through the clutter. There still are some of the mega, research entities that offer a full range of research services from qualitative all the way up through all kinds of quantitative and analytic services. And they are housed. And so, from the client perspective, I need to understand what I'm getting and at what cost. And frankly, my issue has always been I need to work with research partners, and I did that throughout my entire career in industry because we did not collect data on our own, but needed to work with reputable research partners that, for me, really understood my customers and prospects. If they could come to me and demonstrate that understanding, we can have a conversation.
Thank you for that. Uh, Thinking back to a slightly earlier time in this discussion, early on, you shared what were some of the critical touch points um, along your journey to really gaining a foundation in survey research and cultivating your excitement about survey research. Uh, on the on the flip side of that, as you think back over the course of your career, missteps. Are there any key missteps that you feel that you've made? Maybe that didn't necessarily throw you off track, but anything that you look back and you say, you know what, if I had to do it again, I would do this differently. Had I done this, things may have been a little easier or turned out in a different way for me.
Well, I have the feeling that I've had a highly successful career, not filled with missteps, but things that, you know, hopefully got course corrected. And, one of those was in working at IBM. And, I started a communications measurements and research function for IBM. And again, that was external facing. We were evaluating so much of the marketing communications and advertising. And the misstep is that the work that we were doing was going to be welcomed with open arms by all parties, both those working inside the company and certainly the advertising agencies. Who wouldn't want to know whether that dog was going to hunt or not? Well, as we did the research on the pre-testing on these marketing communications, there were lots of battles, and I'm not going to say they were pitched battles, but the conversations around why this ad or that ad didn't work, and why our respondents, because we evaluated them both in a quantitative measurement and a qualitative way. So we had all of the data and information, But on the backside, if the advertising agency was coming forward and was pitching to us, the client, um, oftentimes we were saying, no, that one doesn't quite get it. So what really changed was when I said, we're always in the argument about the data when we're having to make decisions about what is going to pass through the filter, about what's going to go on air. So me and my team, we actually started sponsoring these little mini 2 and 3 hour research seminars. And that is, we don't have any actual data, but we're going to have conversations about our approaches to how we collect data, why we do it, et cetera, and what it means when the data come back. We did a number of those sessions, both for the folks in-house and the advertising agency, and that virtually eliminated those pitch battles when we actually brought forward, the actual data on what was being presented to us by the advertising agency. And it had two very important effects. Number one, I think what they created was better because they understood the kind of metrics and from the responses that we got from people who were going to see the marketing communications. They understood them better as a result. So that was one. And two, um, this was a serendipitous finding in that we had lots of research in the field, and so we had a campaign that was actually running in South America, and we had some tracking data on one of those marketing communication pieces. And someone, a senior executive, said, don't like that. It shouldn't run, whatever. I actually brought forward data in support of that piece of advertising to show the sales impact, and it was strong and positive. And so I think then the advertising agencies no longer saw me as a foe, but a true advocate for doing the right thing.
Thank you. As we now prepare to wind down our discussion, I'd like to leap forward to the present. Thinking about this stage of your career, having worked in the academy, having worked in industry, back in the academy, having retired, what are you engaged in right now? Or what are you looking forward to being involved in?
Well, what I'm engaged in now is what I will call selective mentoring activities. And that is, I know that there are still lots of folk in the academy who rely upon publications, presentations to demonstrate their chops as scholars. And I continue to support those efforts, even though when I was in industry, so much of our stuff was proprietary and could not and should not be published. But it's important to folks in the academy. So I continue to mentor those folks on papers and publications where asked. I don't take up all assignments, but I'm selective where it will really have an impact. I think the same thing could also be done for folks mentoring of folks who are working in research firms and public opinion polling, because there are some thorny issues that need to be solved. And, having many years of experience, perfectly willing to also provide advice and counsel to folks to, kind of walk through those kinds of things too. But the one thing that I will note through all of the years, and have made some decisions about whether to stay or leave, positions and firms. And it's always been my ability to say to myself, have I worked ethically? Have I actually done the work regardless? Because we did not have review boards in industry. Did not exist, but it had to make sure that all of the research I was doing, conducting, had responsibility for was being done in an ethical way. There were salespeople who would come and say, "Hey, tell me about what so and so." No, you are not going to have access to those data. They are not identified, weren't collected for that purpose, and you will not have that. Always stood my ground. So, making sure that the research is being done in an ethical way. That's one. And two, making sure that I'm always standing firm in support of the people. Things can get dicey in industry and people want you to do certain things with people. No, not going to do it. So every morning, my acid test is, can I look myself in the mirror and say, you're good? And when I can do that, and I have well over a half century, I'm good.
Well, as we wind down, uh, you mentioned advice and counsel. Um, AAPOR can be a valuable resource for people who may be seeking mentoring, advice, and counsel. What would what advice and counsel would you give to an early career professional or a mid-career professional who's a member of AAPOR about how they can leverage their association for mentoring opportunities?
Well, yeah, again, APOR does provide mentors. It, has a call out for people who want to mentor. Um, you know, throughout, my entire career, some of the best opportunities I found were going to the annual meetings and meeting people face to face, and you'll find out if you have a connection or not. And meeting people, understanding their issues, their experiences, and whether they can provide advice and counsel, I think is extremely important. So whether you do it formally through APOR, VAPOR, or some other mechanism, yeah, get connected. And the other important piece about mentoring is some people have a belief that you have one mentor. No, you're going to need two, three, four, or more mentors because, like a parent, a parent is not created to do everything for you. We think they are, but they can do many things. But you have those conversations with the aunts and uncles and others who have other expertise and skills. It's the life experience which is important.
Is there anything that we have not talked about today that you would like to share?
No, I think, for me, it's important that every researcher takes stock of who they are, what are those skills, and we, we can't do everything 100%. But there are others, in our orbits that are more skilled. And so that's why it's important to be really connected with others. And very importantly, have a diverse set of perspectives because it's really through that diverse set of life experiences that the work you do can actually benefit and frankly, what you can deliver to others. So it's through those conversations and having the network that we actually will be in a better place as a profession.
Well, that was my last question. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for participating, for your valuable contributions in our industry, and for this pioneer interview.
I appreciate it and look forward to learning more.
Thank you.
Take care.